If you've ever found yourself wandering through a small American town in the hours just after midnight, you know the silence feels different. Not empty, but thick, carrying memories and secrets in its hush. In Briarwood, Pennsylvania, the night air was damp, scented faintly of honeysuckle and wood smoke, the kind that crept in from chimneys and curled under doors. It was the kind of night meant for sleeping, but sleep was rare in places built on the things folks tried to forget. On that night, a single Greyhound bus rolled down Route 14, its headlights pushing aside pockets of fog that hung low over the cracked blacktop. The bus hissed to a stop beside the Briarwood sign, a wooden board with peeling paint that read, Briarwood founded 1862, a community that remembers. But that motto hadn't felt true in decades. From the bus, an old black man stepped down tall and stooped, wearing a long dark coat that brushed the tops of his well-polished shoes. His silver beard glimmered in the weak streetlight, and his eyes, alert and cautious, flicked from shadow to shadow, as if each corner held a question waiting for an answer. He carried nothing but a battered leather satchel, a faded notebook, and a brass pocket watch attached to a chain that he ran between his thumb and forefinger like a rosary. The driver didn't step out. He just looked at the old man through the open door, voice low and steady. "You sure you want to be here, Sir? Briarwood ain't got much to offer at this hour. Not even a soul to greet you." The old man nodded. "There's a few things left here I need to see for myself. Thank you." He didn't say his name. Not yet. He just nodded, hoisted his satchel, and set off down Main Street. The bus groaned and vanished into the mist, leaving him alone under the flickering light. Briarwood at 2:17 a.m. felt suspended in time. The town square was silent. The storefronts shuttered tight. Only the neon open sign at Lou's Diner pulsed blue and red through foggy glass, the colors reflected on the slick pavement. The bell tower of First Methodist stood like a lone sentinel, its face missing the minute hand. Further down, a small wooden building, Maple Crest Motel, glowed from a single porch lamp, its light gathering moths like a beacon. The old man stepped inside. Behind the counter, a white woman in a faded housecoat sat flipping through an old Reader's Digest. She looked up, startled, squinting as if he were a dream she was trying to forget. "I'm sorry, sir. We don't do walk-ins after midnight," she said, her tone polite but tight. "I called ahead," he replied, his voice a soft rumble. He slid a folded scrap of paper across the counter. Slanted handwriting, no email, no phone, just a name, Solomon Hayes. The woman frowned, reading the note twice before her face softened. "Room 9, last one on the left. Just for one night, right? I'll need you out by noon." He took the brass key, thanked her, and moved wordlessly down the row of rooms. Room 9 smelled of old cedar and dust. The wallpaper was peeling in the corners, and the carpet held the imprint of long-removed furniture. Solomon placed his satchel by the single window, drew the curtain aside, and watched the empty parking lot. It was so quiet he could hear the tick of the old wall clock and the distant hum of the highway, where memory never slept. He sat on the bed, the brass pocket watch still cool in his hand. Opening the battered notebook, he ran his finger down a page of names, 7 in all, each underlined once the ink faded, but the pain still raw. At the top, in a hand grown shaky with age, it read, Briarwood, 1983, do not forget. He reached into his coat pocket and drew out a photograph, its edges curled with time. 7 children stood in a field behind the old Briarwood school sunlight, spilling over their faces, 6 smiling, one looking away, her face half hidden by shadow. On the back, written in careful cursive, "For those we lost and those who kept watch." Summer, 1983. Solomon set the photograph on the desk and placed the pocket watch beside it. He wound the key as he had done every night for 40 years and held his breath, waiting for the tick that marked time's passage. But tonight the watch was silent. The hands stood still at 3:09 a.m., the same hour etched in his notebook beneath the final name. He felt a chill rise from the floorboards, a loss deeper than time. As Solomon sat in the half-dark, the memories pressed in the laughter of children in sunlit fields, the shouts from the baseball diamond, the sweet roll of gospel from the church steps on Sunday afternoons. Briarwood had been alive once, before the silence crept in, before certain names went unspoken and certain faces disappeared from the yearbooks. Across town, Sheriff Curtis Maddox jolted awake in his recliner, sweat beading his forehead. The faint blue glow of his office security feed flickered across his face. There, in grainy black and white, was the unmistakable outline of Solomon Hayes, older, yes, but unchanged in the way that matters most. Maddox stared at the screen, heart hammering as he reached for the photograph on his desk. 8 men and women officers of the law in crisp uniforms from another era. At the center, a younger Solomon, eyes bright, shoulders squared. God help me, Maddox muttered, voice trembling. He said he'd come back. All these years, and he really came back. He thumbed a worn badge, the edge nicked the words, Briarwood Police, almost faded. Some wounds never heal. Some debts never go unpaid. Back at the motel, Solomon pressed the photo to his chest. He closed his eyes and listened to the motel clock, ticking each sound a sentence from the past. Outside, the fog rolled in from the river, swallowing the streetlights one by one, until only the faint outline of Briarwood remained, a town lost between memory and forgetting. He whispered into the darkness. For every night spent waiting, there's a morning that must come. For every name called out, there's a story that must be heard. As the sky began to lighten, Solomon set the notebook on the nightstand, the brass pocket watch beside it, both silent, both waiting. He did not sleep. He watched the dawn creep over Briarwood, casting long shadows across old secrets. Somewhere a church bell rang, out of tune, barely heard. But for those who listened, it was enough to mark the start of something that could never be undone. The world felt change when morning broke over Briarwood. The river mist clung to the low houses, curling around porch rails and creeping into alleys like something alive and watchful. After a sleepless night in room 9, Solomon Hayes drew the curtains, letting a narrow shaft of pale sunlight spill onto the battered notebook and the silent brass pocket watch on his nightstand. He reached for the watch, hoping for the soft tick that once soothed him, but only silence met his ear. The hands remained frozen at 3:09 a.m., the same hour written in faded ink beneath the last name in his notebook. He rose, straightened his coat, and tucked the notebook and watched carefully into his satchel. In the small mirror above the sink, Solomon saw the lines around his eyes, a map of every disappointment and every hour spent waiting for the truth. He took a deep breath and opened the door, stepping into the morning hush of Briarwood, where even the birdsong seemed hesitant. As he walked down Main Street, the town slowly stirred to life. At Millie's Kitchen, the only diner left in town, the neon sign still flickered, buzzing with more energy than most of the regulars. Solomon pushed the door open, the bell jingling softly above him. The aroma of strong coffee and cinnamon rolls hung in the air, familiar yet distant, like a half-remembered lullaby. Behind the counter, Millie Dorsey wiped a mug with the distracted air of someone wrestling with old thoughts. She looked up, her hand pausing mid-polish when she saw Solomon. For a heartbeat, her eyes widened, not in recognition of a friend, but in the shudder of an old story returned. She tried to steady herself, pressing a smile to her lips. Morning, she offered, her voice a shade too bright. What can I get you? Solomon slid onto the stool by the window, the one nobody ever picked, the one with a crooked view of the vacant lot where the school bus once stopped. Black coffee, he said, his voice gentle but edged with purpose. No sugar. Millie nodded and turned away, but her hands shook. As she filled his cup, whispers began behind her. A pair of older men leaned over their plates, eyes narrowed, murmuring. A young woman in a postal uniform snapped a picture with her phone, sending it off with a hasty hashtag, Ashun, the watchman returns. Solomon sipped his coffee, gazing through the window as the town rolled past. He saw the faded sign for Grady's Bakery, shuttered for years, the library with its windows dusty and dark, the playground where swings twisted in the wind. Each place, each street held memories tied to the names in his notebook, ghosts hiding in plain sight. He left the diner quietly, the bell's farewell a faint warning. Outside, the air was crisp and the world felt both familiar and foreign. People on the sidewalks paused, some stepping back into doorways, others ducking their heads or crossing the street to avoid his gaze. Children peered from behind their mother's legs, curious and silent. Solomon made his way to the old library, its steps chipped and mossy. He ran a hand over the iron rail, feeling the cold seep into his skin. In the back, he paused at the spot where decades ago, a girl named Lila Brooks had buried her first journal. Lila's name was third in his notebook. He knelt and brushed aside a fallen leaf, the memory sharp as winter air. The library door was locked, but Solomon didn't try to enter. Some places he knew opened only for those willing to remember. A group of teenagers rode by on bikes, their laughter brittle loud in the stillness. One boy shouted, "Who you looking for, old man?" And the others snickered. Solomon straightened, pocketed the leaf, and watched them ride off. Even now, after all these years, fear still wore the mask of humor. Back at the Briarwood Sheriff's Office, Curtis Maddox watched the streets through his dusty window, jaw clenched. He stared at the surveillance feed from last night. The image of Solomon's weathered face burned into his mind. On his desk, an old case file lay open, 7 pages yellowed and brittle. At the top, missing persons, summer 1983. Every page ended the same way in questions and denials. Maddox flipped to the final report, where the words "case closed" had been stamped in red. But someone, maybe himself, maybe someone before him, had scrawled lies over it in angry penmanship. The past, it seemed, had a way of coming home. As the day wore on, the town's mood shifted from wary curiosity to nervous speculation. On Briarwood's community Facebook page, grainy photos of Solomon appeared alongside comments ranging from wary to mocking. "Guess the ghost of summer '83 came back for his story," wrote one. "Old Hayes looking for trouble or just lost?" asked another. The hashtag Nosh the Watchman returns started to spread, half joke, half warning. That afternoon, Solomon stood in front of the crumbling brick wall of the old high school. The place was deserted now, a relic of broken promises. He pressed his palm against the mortar, eyes closed. A sound behind him, a quick shuffle, then silence. He turned but saw only his own shadow stretching long across the empty field. In the grocery store, Mrs. Harmon, who'd run the register since the Carter administration, glanced up from her newspaper as Solomon entered. She said nothing, her gaze drifting to the pocket watch chain, glinting at his waist. Shoppers stepped aside as he passed, their conversation stalling mid-sentence. A little boy asked his mother, "Is that the man from the stories?" The woman hushed him, ushering him away. At sundown, Solomon returned to the Maple Crest Motel. He sat at the small desk in his room, notebook, open, pencil poised. For a long time, he simply stared at the list of names. He traced the letters so familiar, yet so heavy, and beneath them, drew a careful line under the first. He thought of all he'd seen that day, the silence, the sideways glances, the old resentments simmering just beneath the surface. In Briarwood, secrets didn't die, they just changed shape, passing from one whisper to the next, carried in the eyes of those who remembered. As night deepened, a commotion stirred outside the diner. The county's oldest janitor, Paul Easton, whose name was second in Solomon's notebook, had failed to come home. His wife stood on the porch phone, pressed to her ear, voice shaking as she called for help. The sheriff arrived but offered only platitudes. "Probably went for a walk, Mary. He'll be back." But everyone knew Paul never left after dark. A note appeared taped to the diner's front door at sunrise. Written in uneven block letters, it read, "A clock only stops if you hide the key." The town awoke to whispers and fear rumors running faster than fact. In his room, Solomon held the brass watch in his palm. Still no tick, still no time. He closed his eyes, hearing again the laughter of children in the schoolyard, the promises made and broken under the watchful gaze of the old willow tree. Briarwood felt colder that night. The silence that once protected now threatened to swallow everything. But Solomon knew sometimes the loudest truths are the ones left unspoken. The sun set early in Briarwood that October evening, its last red streaks fading behind the bare-limbed trees that bordered Willow Green. As dusk slid across the town, it seemed as though all of Briarwood held its breath, waiting for something that no one could name but everyone felt. Word had traveled quickly. Paul Easton, the janitor, was gone, and with him a sense of safety that the townspeople had taken for granted. A rumor grew that the old man, the watchman, as the children now called him, wasn't just a visitor, but a harbinger stirring up the ghosts of 1983. Some whispered it with anger, others with awe. But by the time darkness claimed the streets, every porch light on Main Street was burning. Solomon Hayes sat on the edge of his bed in room 9, his back to the pale glow of the motel lamp. On the desk before him lay the photograph, the notebook, and the silent pocket watch. He could feel the town's fear pulsing in the air, the way you might sense thunder rumbling just beyond the horizon. A soft knock sounded at his door. Solomon answered to find a teenage girl, maybe 16, standing nervously with her hands in her jacket pockets. She looked up at him with clear, searching eyes. "Are you Mr. Hayes?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "I am. My mom said, folks are meeting at Willow Green. The council wants you to come, she said. The girl faltered, glancing at the notebook in his hand. She said you have something we all need to hear. Solomon nodded, slipping the watch and the photograph into his satchel and following her out. The night was cold, a crisp 42 degrees, but Briarwood's old green was packed with neighbors and strangers, alike faces, tight with suspicion, hope, and shame. A makeshift podium had been set up beneath the willow tree, its long branches trembling in the breeze. Folding chairs dotted the lawn, most filled, but others left empty like small apologies. Town council members clustered near the front. Sheriff Maddox stood to one side, arms folded, his badge dull in the dim light. At the back of the crowd stood Maya Thompson, the same girl who'd knocked at Solomon's door, clutching a small recorder in her hand. The council president, Robert Wyatt, hair now more gray than brown, shoulders stooped with age, stepped to the microphone, his voice carrying through the chilly air. "We're here," he said, "because our town can't keep running from itself. Mr. Hayes, if you have something to share, we're ready to listen." A hush fell. Solomon approached the podium, his steps slow but steady. He set the brass watch and the photograph on the wooden stand, and for a long moment he simply looked at the faces before him, some defiant, some sorrowful, most trying not to meet his eyes. He opened his notebook, voice low but unwavering. 40 years ago, 7 children disappeared from this town's care, lost not to strangers but to silence. Their names are here. He lifted the notebook so all could see the careful script, the years of pain pressed into every letter. And so are the names of those who watched it happen, who kept the truth behind locked doors and closed mouths. Solomon paused, taking the pocket watch in his hand. This watch belonged to Lila Brooks. She was 12 when she vanished. She gave it to me the day before she disappeared, said, "Keep this safe, Mr. Hayes, so time doesn't forget me." His voice wavered, but only for a moment. He continued, "Since I returned, every door I've knocked on has answered with silence or fear. I have watched as some of you mocked me, posted pictures, spread old lies. I came not for revenge, but for memory. Because a town without memory is no town at all. It's only a shadow waiting for morning that never comes." A murmur ran through the crowd. On the edges, a few faces shone with tears. At the center, Robert Wyatt's lips trembled as he pressed a hand to his chest. "We thought," Wyatt choked, "if we didn't speak their names, the pain would leave us. But it's haunted every day since. I was deputy then. I followed orders. I didn't look for Lila the way I should have. I didn't help you, Mr. Hayes. And for that I am sorry." Wyatt's voice cracked. He stepped down from the podium and in front of everyone reached for Solomon's hand. "I was wrong. We all were." He bowed his head, and the hush deepened into something like forgiveness. Maya pressed the recorder's button. From its small speaker, the crowd heard a trembling voice, Lila's recorded weeks before she vanished. "If you're listening," the child's voice said, "please remember me. Please don't let time take my name." The words drifted into the night, settling on every shoulder. Solomon looked out over Briarwood, and for the first time saw something change. People began to stand slowly at first, then in growing waves. A woman wept openly, clutching her grown son's arm. A boy left his chair to hug his grandmother. Even Sheriff Maddox, stiff and unspeaking, blinked back tears as he studied the watch, then the faces before him. Solomon closed his notebook, his voice softer now. "We cannot bring back what was lost, but we can remember. We can speak the truth so this town does not sleep through its own history." A bell tolled just once from the distant church. Its note carried on the wind, somber and pure. As people dispersed, many stopped to touch the photograph, to add flowers and notes at the willow's roots. The silence that followed was not empty, but full of everything Briarwood had tried to hide, and everything it was now brave enough to face. Solomon waited until the last candles flickered out. Wyatt found him clasping his hand with a grip that said more than words. "Thank you," Wyatt said, "for not letting us forget." Solomon tucked the photograph and notebook away, feeling the weight in his chest lighten. The pocket watch, for the first time since he'd returned, ticked soft and certain against his palm. The days after the ceremony at Willow Green passed in a kind of golden hush. It was as if the town itself was breathing easier, as if a weight had finally been set down after decades of carrying it in silence. Solomon Hayes stayed in Briarwood a little longer, but no one pressed him with questions or avoided him with cold glances anymore. Instead, people greeted him with nods, sometimes soft words, often simply with their eyes, a silent acknowledgement that the world had changed, and so had they. Morning sunlight spilled through Briarwood streets with new purpose. The white clapboard houses along Maple Avenue shone brighter, and on weekends children's laughter rose from the playground that had sat empty for years. At the edge of town where the old school once stood, volunteers gathered, young and old, black and white, each carrying something precious: a sapling, a trowel, a faded photograph, or a small keepsake. They worked side by side to create the Lanham Memorial Garden, named not just for Lila Brooks, but for every child and every story Briarwood once tried to forget. On a Saturday afternoon, the entire town gathered at the garden's edge for the dedication. A new sign, hand-carved by the high school wood shop, stood beneath the willow's outstretched arms in memory of the lost and the found. Beneath it, 7 river stones, each etched with a name, formed a quiet circle. At the center, set in a glass case, rested the brass pocket watch, its face polished, hands ticking once more. Solomon watched as Maya Thompson, the girl who had first knocked on his motel door, stepped forward. She was chosen to speak, not because she was the loudest or oldest, but because her heart was open and her memory clear. Her voice carried across the lawn, quiet but certain. My grandmother used to say, "A town is its people, but it's also its stories, the ones we tell and the ones we hide." For a long time, Briarwood tried to hide from the truth, but Mr. Hayes came back not to punish, but to remind us. Remind us of what matters and who we are. She paused, eyes shining. This garden is for them and for us, because memory, like a watch, is meant to keep ticking, so none of us is ever lost to silence again. The crowd stood in silence, broken only by the wind sighing through the willow branches. Solomon felt the moment as deeply as the ache in his bones. Years of wandering, of sleepless nights of hope, nearly surrendered. In that instant, he knew he had done what he came to do. He had not come to end things, but to begin something that would last beyond his own name. After the ceremony, people lingered. They left notes and flowers at the stones, traced the watch's glass with gentle fingers, and shared stories, some whispered, some aloud. Sheriff Maddox, his eyes rimmed, Red, stood by the edge of the crowd, his hands folded over his badge. When he caught Solomon's eye, he nodded once, a gesture heavy with apology and gratitude. Later, as dusk crept in, Solomon sat on a wooden bench beneath the willow. The garden was quiet now, the candles flickering low. Maya approached and sat beside him, hands folded in her lap. "Are you leaving soon?" she asked, not looking up. Solomon smiled, lines deepening at the corners of his eyes. "I think I am, Maya. This place doesn't need me the way it used to. It's yours now." Maya hesitated, then spoke softly. "Would you leave the watch? I think it should stay here. For them, for all of us." He took the brass pocket watch from his pocket, feeling its weight, its warmth. He pressed it into her palm, the chain curled like a memory between their fingers. "Time is yours to keep now," he said. "Use it well." As darkness gathered, Solomon walked the length of Main Street one last time. Storefronts glowed with new light. People sat on porches, voices, gentle laughter, rising now and then, sweet and easy like water running over stone. Briarwood was changed, though it would bear its scars forever. But the scars were proof of healing, not just of hurt. At the edge of town, Solomon paused and looked back. The willow tree stood tall in the moonlight, its leaves stirring. In the window of City Hall, the pocket watch caught the lamplight, its hands moving forward, steady and sure. The notebook, with all its names and stories, now belonged to Maya, tucked beneath her arm as she guided children through the new garden, sharing the lessons of memory and truth. Briarwood's story didn't end in anger or shame, but in hope. The town was never the same after Solomon's return, but it was truer, honest, in a way that only comes after forgiveness. People learned that keeping silent can wound deeper than any word, but speaking out can heal in ways nothing else can. A month later, a new tradition took root. Every October at 2:00 a.m., the hour Solomon first arrived, the church bell tolled, and candles were lit in every window. The memory night, they called it. Neighbors gathered in the Lana Memorial Garden, telling stories, singing songs, and reading the names etched on the stones. Young and old stood side by side, promising that no one in Briarwood would ever be forgotten again. No one saw Solomon Hayes after that final walk. Some said he moved on to another town with a story in need of mending. Others believed he simply found peace at last. Only one thing was certain: whenever the bell rang and the pocket watch ticked in its glass case. Everyone remembered the man who came to wake a town from silence, not with anger, but with memory, forgiveness, and hope.